Right now, I mean, millions of adults are just tapping their phone screens, fiercely protecting like a 100-day streak on some language learning app.
Oh yeah, the streaks are huge. People get so protective of them.
Totally. And they're entirely unaware that they are literally biologically rewiring their brains to just completely freeze up the moment they actually try to speak to a native speaker.
Right, which is the exact opposite of what they think they're doing.
Exactly. You've probably seen the ads,
Yeah.
bright colors, bold text, promising that you can become fluent in German in 3 months just by playing a matching game on your morning commute.
Yeah, the pitch is essentially that you can bypass all the traditional struggle, the hard work of learning a language and just sort of hack your way to fluency.
Right. And today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating source material. It's a collection of excerpts from a text called The Architecture of German Fluency.
It's a great text, very revealing.
It really is. And our mission today is to investigate why these fast-track language classes and those app-based shortcuts, why they aren't actually shortcuts at all. According to the source, they are fundamentally setting adult learners up for failure.
Yeah, they really are.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We want to understand exactly why relying on these frictionless methods guarantees that you are going to freeze up when you step off the plane in Europe.
Well, to understand the failure, we first have to look at the mechanism that these fast-track programs rely on, which is passive learning. I mean, fluency isn't a product you can just quickly download into your brain, right?
Right, it's not a software update.
Exactly. It requires thousands of hours of exposure and repetition. But when you use these apps, they mimic this really passive model. You sit in a quiet room, you look at a cartoon picture of an apple, you tap the word appfall, and you get that triumphant little sound effect.
Oh man, that little ping, it feels great. You get that dopamine hit, you see your progress bar fill up, and it genuinely feels like learning.
It does. But the text is very clear here. Recognizing vocabulary in a controlled digital environment, it just does not translate to the physical and cognitive ability to speak the language in the real world.
So using an app to match pictures is basically like playing a driving video game. But then actually standing in the middle of a busy cafe in Berlin or Munich, that's like trying to merge onto the Autobahn in rush hour.
That is a perfect analogy, actually, yes.
But why is the drop-off so severe? I mean, if I've spent weeks and I've memorized 500 German words on my phone, why can't my brain access them when I'm just trying to order a coffee?
What's fascinating here is the why behind that freeze. Your brain basically encoded all those words in a vacuum, entirely stripped of the variables that exist in real human communication.
Variables like what?
Well, in the real world, your brain isn't just calmly retrieving a vocabulary word from a mental filing cabinet. You are suddenly dealing with just an onslaught of uncontrolled variables. The barista might have a heavy Bavarian accent.
Right, they're not speaking like the robot voice on the app.
Exactly. They are speaking at a rapid native speed. Plus, there's the hiss of an espresso machine in the background. And crucially, there are emotional stakes.
Oh, the social pressure is huge. You don't want to look foolish, and you definitely don't want to hold up the line.
Yeah, and that social pressure triggers a mild stress response. And when you experience stress, cortisol is released in your brain.
Cortisol, okay. It's a stress hormone.
Right. And that cortisol hijacks your working memory, which is the part of your brain responsible for holding and manipulating information in real time. So theory alone, which is all that passive screen tapping gives you, it cannot build the neurological pathways required to process all of those high-pressure variables simultaneously.
Wow, so the vocabulary I learned on my couch was just never stress tested.
Precisely. So the moment the pressure hits in that cafe, the access pathway just shuts down and you completely freeze.
That makes that whole fluency in 3 months claim seem almost, I don't know, dangerous. Because you're building this massive false confidence. You think you're ready for a conversation, but you're really just preparing to pass a multiple choice test in a quiet, padded room.
Yeah, and that failure rate is particularly high for adult learners, especially when tackling a highly structural language like German.
Let's get into that, actually, because the source material spends a lot of time contrasting how children and adults acquire language.
Right, so a child's brain is highly plastic. It absorbs the phonetic patterns and the grammatical rules naturally through just constant immersion and interaction.
Right, like kids don't sit down with a textbook to learn how to speak their native tongue.
Exactly. But the adult brain has already solidified its native language pathways. We are no longer linguistic sponges.
So we can't just, move to Berlin, passively listen to people talk on the train, and expect to just magically absorb the language.
I mean, No, unfortunately not. For adults, the native language pathways are so deeply entrenched that the brain will actively resist processing a new language.
It fights back.
It really does. So to overcome that, adult learners have to rely heavily on conscious learning. We need a structural framework. We basically have to manually carve out new neurological pathways through deliberate, repetitive practice.
We have to understand the rules of the game before we can play it. And
Exactly.
if you're trying to manually carve new neural pathways, the text makes it incredibly clear that German is an absolute mountain to tunnel through.
Wow, German is uniquely demanding.
It's so analytical.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 4 complex cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive, which means the actual spelling and ending of a word changes depending on its grammatical function in the sentence.
Yes, the cases trip up a lot of people.
And then you have 3 distinct genders for nouns that you literally just have to memorize. And don't even get me started on the sentence structure.
Well, the syntax is notoriously rigid, yeah.
It's not just rigid, it actively works against an English speaker's instincts. Because in English, we use a subject-verb-object order. Like, I went to the store. You know the action immediately.
Right, it's very linear.
But in German, you have these shifting sentence orders where the verb can just be pushed all the way to the very end of a massive sentence.
Which requires an entirely different cognitive process because, as an English speaker, your brain is trained to hear the subject, hear the action, and then fill in the details.
Right.
But listening to German, you might hear the subject followed by just a huge string of nouns, adjectives, prepositional phrases, and you have to hold all of those elements in a state of cognitive suspense.
Like keeping data in your computer's RAM.
That's exactly it. You're holding it in your RAM until the speaker finally delivers the verb at the very end to tell you what actually happened to all those nouns.
Okay, wait. I want to stop right there and play devil's advocate for a second, push back on this.
Sure.
Because this kind of feels like a contradiction. If German requires this incredibly high level of structural calculation, and if we just establish that adult brains need conscious learning and strict frameworks, then shouldn't an app filled with repetitive grammar exercises be the exact perfect tool?
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Like if my brain needs to understand how the dative case works, why isn't sitting on my couch doing 50 multiple choice questions about the dative case the absolute best way to manually carve that pathway?
This raises an important question, actually. It seems totally logical, right? But it ignores the fundamental biological difference between declarative memory and procedural memory.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the distinction?
So declarative memory is knowing that something is true. It's knowing that Berlin is the capital of Germany, or knowing that the preposition mit always takes the dative case.
Okay.
You can absolutely build declarative memory on an app. Procedural memory, on the other hand, is knowing how to do something in real time.
Oh, like muscle memory.
Exactly. It's knowing how to ride a bike or how to physically articulate a German sentence while your brain calculates the cases and the verb placement at native speed.
But if I have the declarative memory, like if I know the grammar rule perfectly because I've drilled it on my phone every day for 3 months, why can't my brain just access that rule and use it to speak?
Because the retrieval speed of declarative memory is far too slow for human conversation. Think about the cognitive load. If you're relying on declarative memory in that Munich cafe, your brain is trying to have a real-time conversation while simultaneously flipping through a mental grammar textbook.
Like, okay, the noun is feminine, it's the indirect object, so the article changes to der.
Exactly. And by the time you've calculated all of that and formed the sentence, the conversation has moved on. The person you're talking to is already looking at their watch.
So the multiple choice app gives you the declarative knowledge, but it entirely fails to build that procedural reflex.
Yes, because when you use a fast track app, the verb is usually sitting right there on the screen as an option to tap.
Right, you're not pulling it out of thin air.
No, you never actually force your working memory to expand its capacity. You never train your brain to hold those nouns in suspense while you generate the verb yourself. You're basically studying the blueprint of the house, but you're never physically pouring the concrete.
Wow.
Studying grammar without actively speaking and generating the language yourself creates this incredibly brittle foundation that just shatters under the speed of real conversation.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable question about the language app industry itself.
Let's hear it.
If the adult brain has to go through this grueling process of converting declarative rules into procedural reflexes, and if expanding your cognitive RAM is a biological hurdle, how do these companies legally justify the claim that you can become fluent in 90 days?
Well, they do it by fundamentally shifting the goalposts of what fluency actually means.
Right.
The Get Fluent Fast industry relies on a heavily watered down, highly restricted definition of the word.
The source text highlights this beautifully. When a fast-track program promises fluency, they're usually talking about survival phrases.
Exactly.
They're teaching you how to ask where the train station is or how to order a beer or how to say your name. You're just learning a script.
Yeah.
It's like going to become a master chef in a weekend seminar, and you only learn how to boil water and order takeout.
That's a great way to put it. And reciting a script is not fluency. True fluency implies independence.
Right.
It is the ability to adapt to unpredictable situations. It's the capacity to argue a point, to understand a nuanced joke, express an abstract emotion, or navigate some complicated bureaucratic issue at a local government
To
office.
put this into perspective for you, the listener, we have to look at how real language proficiency is actually measured.
Hmm.
The source material references the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages.
Right, the CEFR. It's the objective, standardized scale used globally to measure language ability. It categorizes learners into 6 levels. A1 and A2 are your beginner levels, B1 and B2 are intermediate to upper intermediate, and C1 and C2 are advanced to absolute mastery.
And the text points out that B2 is generally considered the threshold for true independent fluency.
Yes.
This is the level where you can function in a German-speaking work environment, you can comprehend complex texts, and you can easily navigate daily life without constantly pausing to search for words.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the actual cognitive difference between the A2 level, which is what you might reach after a few months on an app, and the B2 level.
Yeah, what is the difference inside the brain?
The chasm between A2 and B2 is massive. At A2, you are still mentally translating. You generate a thought in English, you pause, you translate that thought into German using your declarative memory, and then you finally speak.
Which is exhausting.
It's incredibly exhausting, and it limits you to very simple concepts.
It's like running your brain through a dial-up internet connection.
Exactly. But at the B2 level, a profound cognitive shift occurs.
Yep.
You stop translating. You begin to generate spontaneous thought directly in German.
Oh, wow.
Your procedural memory takes over, allowing you to bypass English entirely. You can handle ambiguity. If you don't know a specific word, your brain effortlessly circles around the concept and finds another way to explain it without freezing.
Okay, so what is the actual realistic timeline for an adult learner to reach that B2 level of spontaneous thought generation?
The source material is unequivocal about this. Reaching the B2 level in a complex language like German takes an adult learner up to 2 years of consistent, rigorous study and practice.
2 years.
2 years, not 3 months.
I think for anyone listening right now who has ever felt frustrated or felt inadequate because they didn't magically speak a new language after a 90-day app subscription, you really need to hear that timeline. It takes 2 years. You didn't fail. The product failed you by selling you a biological impossibility. I mean, if you genuinely believed you could reach independent fluency in 12 weeks by tapping your phone for 10 minutes a day, you were sold a bill of goods from the very first ad.
It really is a disservice to learners because it frames the natural, necessary struggle of language acquisition as a personal failing rather than just an expected part of the journey.
Okay, so having completely dismantled the fast-track illusion, let's look at the actual roadmap. So what does this all mean? If the shortcut is a dead end, and it realistically takes 2 years to reach B2, how do we ensure we don't fail along that 2-year path?
Well, according to the text, the fatal flaw of most adult learners who fail is separating theory from practice. We discussed how studying grammar in isolation creates declarative knowledge that you can't use in real time.
Right.
But the reverse is also true. You cannot simply try to speak your way to fluency without understanding the structural rules.
Because if you just dive into conversation without the framework, you aren't actually speaking German. You're just throwing German vocabulary over an English syntax structure.
Precisely. You'll quickly hit a ceiling, and worse, you will ingrain grammatical errors so deeply into your procedural memory that they become incredibly difficult to unlearn later.
Oh, bad habits.
Exactly. The key is that theory and practice must be relentlessly married. Grammar explains the mechanics of the language, but active conversation is the physical practice that trains the brain to apply those mechanics automatically.
The source text makes a comparison here that I think completely reorients how we should approach this. It argues that language learning is not a memorization task. It is fundamentally an athletic pursuit.
It's an essential paradigm shift. When you treat language like memorizing a textbook, you get frustrated when you can't recall a fact. But when you treat it like athletic conditioning, your expectations change entirely.
Right. If you decide to train for a marathon, you wouldn't just read a book about biomechanics, sit on your couch, and expect to run 26 miles.
Of course not.
You understand that you have to physically condition your muscles. You have to build cardiovascular endurance over months of gradual effort. So if language is an athletic pursuit, then consistency matters infinitely more than speed.
And just like physical training, cognitive conditioning requires resistance to force growth.
Resistance.
Yes. In language learning, that resistance is real-world interaction. It's the friction of forming a sentence in front of another human being. It's making a mistake, feeling that slight flush of embarrassment, being corrected in real time, and trying again.
So that stress we talked about earlier, the cortisol that hijacks your brain,
Yeah.
you actually have to expose yourself to that stress in small doses to build a tolerance to it.
Exactly. That emotional and cognitive friction is the very mechanism that encodes the language into your procedural long-term memory. A fast-track app removes the friction to make the experience pleasant. But in doing so, it removes the catalyst for actual growth.
You can't build a muscle without lifting a weight.
Yeah.
So applying this athletic mindset, how does the learner actually structure their 2-year journey to avoid the fast-track trap?
They focus on simultaneous development. Listening, reading, speaking, and writing must all develop together. You study the dative case on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday you force yourself to use it in a conversation with a tutor or a language partner.
Even if you're not ready.
Especially if you're not ready. You don't wait until you feel ready to speak, because you will never feel ready. You embrace the messy, imperfect process of applying the rules in real time, knowing that every single mistake is just a necessary rep in your cognitive workout.
And frankly, giving up the shortcut mindset is actually incredibly liberating.
It really is.
It might seem daunting at first to hear that fluency takes 2 years, but it removes a massive amount of pressure. It turns what feels like a constant cycle of immediate failure into a manageable long-term athletic pursuit.
Yes.
You stop judging yourself for not being fluent by summer, and you start celebrating the incremental gains. You notice that your cognitive RAM expanded just a little bit today, or that you generated a sentence without translating it in your head first.
And that mindset shift is what separates the learners who reach B2 from the millions who just quit. Adults who accept the timeline build stable, deep foundations, and the reward for that patience is immense.
Because when they finally do travel to Germany, they don't freeze up in the cafe.
Right, because they have spent 2 years building their procedural reflexes, they hit the ground running. They can actually engage with the daily life and culture because they did the heavy lifting beforehand.
Now, to be fair to the technology, the source material doesn't argue that apps are entirely useless.
Yeah.
They do have a place in the ecosystem, right?
Oh, they do, provided they are viewed correctly as supplemental tools, not as the primary engine of learning.
Okay.
They are excellent for vocabulary review or for drilling a specific verb conjugation during a 5-minute break.
So they're essentially the digital flashcards of our era. But they're just one minor piece of equipment in the gym. They can supplement your training, but they can never replace the time, the repetition, the immersion, and the messy friction of real human interaction.
Because language is inherently a social construct. It evolved to facilitate human connection, not to be solitary data input.
And that actually brings up a really profound implication about the path we choose to take when learning. We started this deep dive exploring the temptation of fast-track language classes, and we've established the neurological reality. Getting fluent fast isn't a shortcut, it is a fundamental failure.
Yeah, a biological impossibility.
It relies on passive learning that collapses under real-world pressure. It ignores the adult brain's need to convert declarative rules into procedural reflexes. And it sells a false definition of fluency that falls apart long before you ever reach that crucial B2 level of spontaneous thought.
You really have to treat language acquisition as a long-term athletic pursuit, embracing the necessary friction of human conversation.
But beyond the cognitive mechanics, there's a bigger question here about what we are actually trying to achieve. I mean, if language is fundamentally about human connection, about bridging cultural gaps, reading the nuance in someone's voice, and sharing a genuine interaction with another person, then what does it mean when we try to optimize that process by staring silently at a screen?
That's a great point.
Could relying strictly on solitary fast-track apps actually be teaching our brains to isolate ourselves rather than connect? When we try to strip away the challenging, vulnerable, and beautiful human interaction just to save a few months? Are we accidentally stripping away the very soul of the language we are trying to learn? Something for you to mull over next time you see one of those ads popping up on your feed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Drop the illusion of the shortcut.